meeting is called to order. Please stand to flag salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
roll call, please.
Mr. Cornell.
He's here.
Okay. Mrs. Matthews.
Yes.
Mr. Jess.
Here.
Mr. Prudente. Mr. Puntillo is absent. Mrs. Schweitzer.
Here.
Mrs. Van Horn.
Here.
Mr. Sergio.
Present.
Mrs. Olson.
Here.
Mrs. Frederick.
Here. Adequate notice of this meeting in compliance with Chapter 231 of the Public Laws of 1975, entitled the Open Public Meetings Act, has been provided by action of the Board of Education on November 21st, 2017. Notice has been provided to the two newspapers circulated in the school district, and a posted notice to this effect on the Board of Education Building Bulletin Board Administrative Headquarters, 51 West 2th Street, Somerville, New Jersey. The floor is now open to public comment on agenda items.
Hi, Kerry Ireland, 96 Ivy Lane, Bridgewater. I'm secretary at the high school. I'm just curious what the middle school comfort closet is.
I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Okay. Superintendent's report, Dr. Dean.
Okay, we're going to start off with Mark Zinnemer doing his board harassment, intimidation, and bullying training. I don't know if we want to turn off the lights or can we see?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Zinnemer. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the board attorney. We're going to do a very brief presentation on HIB. The law requires that we provide training every year for the Board of Education on the subject of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. As part of our CUSAC review, it's one of the boxes we have to check, but it's also a really important topic. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the law, what it's about, what it's designed to protect against, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So New Jersey has been described as having one of the toughest harassment, intimidation, bullying laws in the country, also known as HIB. And it's tough for a variety of reasons. One, the zero tolerance approach that it takes to HIB. The law and our policy doesn't say we kind of tolerate it. It says we prohibit harassment, intimidation, and bullying. The law's purpose is prevention. So the state and courts and juries don't look at how well we responded to harassment, intimidation, and bullying, but rather they want to know what did we do to prevent it in the first place. And when a law is designed to prevent something from happening, it's always much more difficult than a law that says how did you react. So it's preventative, it's preventative, not reactive. Another reason that it's tough is these cases often involve multiple aggressors and multiple victims. They don't fit into these nice, neat little packages, as you would say. So sometimes you'll find that the bully is the victim and the victim is the bully, and the cases are complicated. And as you'll see from our definition of HIB under the law, it's a very convoluted, complicated definition, and sometimes it's not always easy to determine when something is harassment, intimidation, and bullying, or whether it's something else. For instance, simply a code of conduct violation. Another reason the law is tough is that we have to worry about not only what our students do on campus, but we also have to worry about what's going on off campus. So the law does deal with conduct that occurs off campus that has a nexus back to the school district. For instance, things that students do on social media, cyberbullying, that spills back into the school district environment is something that our administrators are required to investigate and respond to appropriately, and as I said before, prevent in the first place. And then number 5, a significant amount of administrative time and resources are devoted to this law. Board hearings, if necessary, and we'll talk about that later. It's a very time-consuming statute. Its purpose is certainly laudable, but it does take a significant amount of time. Under the HIB statute, school districts are required to appoint certain officials within the school district, such as the anti-bullying specialists, whose job it is to investigate these cases. We have an HIB coordinator, whose job it is to review our policies, to strengthen strengthen them to make sure they're in effect and that they're properly doing what they're designed to do. We also have school safety teams whose job it is again to review our policies, make sure that we're preventing HIB, providing the appropriate training like we're doing tonight, and so forth. So let's break down what is harassment, intimidation, and bullying under the statute. And the parentheticals that you'll see in the law there, those are things that I added. Those are not in the actual statute itself, but I thought it would be a little bit easier to understand with those parentheticals. So what is harassment, intimidation, and bullying? It's a gesture, which could be a dirty look, for instance. It's a verbal, physical, or physical act, or any electronic communication. We talked about cyberbullying before. That's what electronic communication refers to. How often? It could be a single incident or a series of incidents. People often think of bullying as something that has to happen over a course of time. Not necessarily the case. It could be a single incident. It's got to be motivated by something. It's got to be reasonably perceived as being motivated by an actual or a perceived characteristic. An actual characteristic would be bullying a student based on the fact that that student's in a wheelchair. That's an actual characteristic of visible disability. A perceived characteristic is if I perceive somebody to be something. For instance, if a student is perceived to be gay, whether that student is gay or not, that student is entitled to the protections of the statute. It's got to be based on a characteristic such as race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, or a mental, physical, or sensory disability, or by any other distinguishing characteristic. So what makes New Jersey's HIB law unique is that it's almost akin to an anti-discrimination statute, as you can see. And I'm going to talk about other distinguishing characteristics. You might be saying, Mark, what is another distinguishing characteristic? That could be a student with freckles. It could be a student who's got big ears, for instance. The Commissioner of Education has held that teasing a student or bullying a student based on the fact that that student's a vegetarian was found to be a distinguishing characteristic. Bullying a student because of athletic abilities has been determined to be a distinguishing characteristic. Bullying a student because that student has head lice was determined by the Commissioner of Education to be another distinguishing characteristic. So that's one of the catch-alls in the statute. Where and when it takes place on school property, at any school-sponsored function, or on a school bus or off-school grounds, as I mentioned before. That does what? It's got to substantially disrupt or interfere with the orderly operation of the school or the rights of other students. And then the statute goes on. It's got to meet one of four additional other criteria. And so this Section A looks at it from the perspective of the bully, so that a reasonable person should know under the circumstances will have the effect of physically or emotionally harming a student, or damaging the student's property, or placing a student in reasonable fear of physical or emotional harm to his person or damage to his property. 2, looks at it from the perspective of the bully. Did it have the effect of insulting or demeaning any student or group of students in such a way as to cause disruption in or interference with the orderly operation of the school? Or 3, does it create a hostile educational environment at school for the student? Or D, does it infringe on the rights of the student at school by interfering with the student's education, or by, again, you see these buzzwords, severely or pervasively causing physical or emotional harm to the student? So that's why I mentioned before, this is a very complicated, in my opinion, convoluted definition. And so your administration, when they're faced with a case, has to kind of interpret this statute, look at the facts of the case, and say, does it meet the definition of bullying? And that's not always easy to do, based upon this complicated definition, which in my opinion could have been made probably much more simple. As a matter of fact, they added this year to the HIB bullying definition a requirement that the definition also has to include the language that bullying is based on an imbalance of power. So there has to be a power imbalance for it also to constitute bullying, which to me makes a lot of sense. So every year we have to report to the Department of Education as part of our violence and vandalism report statistics on bullying. So the state gathers all this information from every school district in the state, and they report out on it. So I thought these statistics were somewhat interesting. Last year throughout the state of New Jersey, don't get worried, this was not Somerville, but there were 18,335 investigations statewide on HIB. That's a lot of investigations statewide. About a third were confirmed. In the year before, very similar numbers, 17,650 investigations leading to 6,201 affirmed cases. This may be or may not be surprising to you. Middle school students made up the vast majority of the HIB offenses. So students in 5 through 8 were responsible for the majority of the HIB offenses which were committed. And so comparing 15, 16 to 16, 17, what were the types of HIB endured? And the percentages you'll see add up to more than 100% because there's overlap. 11% was gestures, 7% physical, 79% verbal, 16% physical, and electronic communication was 19%. I was a little surprised by this. I would have thought that the electronic communication would have been the highest percent, but it was actually the verbal was the highest percent. And so why were students targeted? 19, again, overlap in the numbers, which is why it adds up to more than 100%, but race and color was 19%, 4% was religion, ancestry, national origin, 6%, sexual orientation, 12%, gender, 12%, gender identity and expression, 4%, mental, physical, or sensory disability, and I probably wasn't surprised by this, but the most cases involved this other distinguishing characteristic that I talked about before. So, under the law, there are very stringent timelines by which these cases have to be investigated. 10 days, 10 school days from start to finish. And that puts a lot of pressure on your administration when faced with these cases. It's easy when you have one victim and one bully. It's not so easy when you have multiple victims, multiple bullies, a case that spans many, many months or sometimes even years. Difficult to investigate these cases in 10 days, but I think the legislature found that before the law was enacted, these cases sometimes would sit on administrators' desks for months, and it would take months and months and months before the cases got investigated. So they wanted to impose a very stringent timeline on us. The law says that a parent or guardian who's not satisfied with the results has a right to request a hearing before the Board of Education where they present their appeal to you, and they come before the Board of Education in closed session and say, hey, we think the administration got it wrong and here's why. Now the law has been amended to say that that request has to be filed within 60 days. Before that, there was no timeline by which a parent had to appeal. So interestingly enough, in some of the districts I represent, we had HIB cases from September, October, and we'd get an appeal from a parent in May for something that happened many months ago. Now they've imposed a time period on it. The hearing then has to be held within 10 days of the parent's request, which sometimes could require a special meeting of the board if it's not within your normal regularly scheduled meeting agenda. The board then has to issue a decision after hearing the appeal to either affirm, reverse, or modify the administration's determination. The parent will get a written decision from the board secretary on behalf of the board explaining why the board reached the decision that it reached, and the parent then has a right to go to the Commissioner of Education to appeal the findings of the Board of Education. So that's a very brief overview of the HIB law. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, concerns? Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Can you turn the lights on?
Yes.
Just a question. You mentioned in one of your slides that there were 18,000 cases just in this county.
Yeah, so there were 18,000 cases statewide. Yeah.
Oh, statewide.
And that number's been pretty consistent. Every year it's hovering in the 17,000 to 18,000 range.
Just the next question. There's a 10-day timeline for investigation.
Yeah, so the question is, there's a 10-day timeline under the statute. What if that 10-day timeline cannot be met? The law does say that if we cannot meet the timeline, we are allowed to indicate in the report that we need additional time, and we have a right to supplement it. So in extenuating circumstances, we can do that. And my recommendation in those circumstances is probably to reach out to the parents to say, look, the case is overly complicated. We don't want to rush it just to get it done. We want to get it right, and therefore we're basically requesting we're going to be using additional time, and we're going to reflect that in there. As long as you're within a reasonable period of time, I don't see it as an issue. Right. Thank you.
Highlights. Vanderveer, PS Grade 2. The final week of observances for the month of October was Red Ribbon Week. The VDV community focused on healthy decision-making and actions. The highlights of the week were the annual visit from Sadecki Puppets, which focused on being a kind friend, and the visit from the high school marching band, where our students could see firsthand the results of hard work and commitment. All second grade students toured Somerville as part of their study of communities. The students were so excited to learn about their town, and of course, to ride the yellow school bus. All PS2 students enjoyed a day of harvesting activities and learning on October 31st. After the school-wide parade, the students explored various learning opportunities, including building STEM projects to hold a pumpkin, measuring and investigating attributes of pumpkins and gourds, and enjoyed a read-aloud of the book Otis and the Scarecrow by Mrs. Moran. For VDV grades 3 to 5, on Friday, October 19th, 30 5th grade students were sworn in to serve as the VDV Safety Patrol for the 2018-19 school year. Mr. Frank Neary from AAA and Officer Vito Spadeta from Somerville Police Department spoke to the students and their guests about the importance of leadership on safety patrol and provided their initial training. Mrs. Ligori, one of our 4th grade teachers, will serve as the patrol supervisor for the 5th consecutive year. The students of K-5 played the first games of Gaga in the newly constructed VDV Gaga pit located next to the playground. The 5th grade senators from last school year, who are currently 6th graders, came back to VDV to instruct the students on playing Gaga during their recess times. This Gaga pit was a year-long project led by the senators when they decided they wanted to leave a legacy to the students of Vanderveer upon their promotion to middle school. The senators delivered their proposal to Somerville K-8 PTO, and the PTO generously voted to fund the cost of the materials. The assembly was completed by members of the district maintenance staff. For Somerville Middle School, SMS is busier than ever. The week of October 29th was SMS Fall Spirit Week. We mismatched our clothes, twinned with classmates and teachers, wore pink to support breast cancer research, and culminated the week with a school-wide pep rally. SMS Spirit, feel our pride. During Red Ribbon Week, everyone in the SMS community pledged not to get involved with drugs. The students wore red ribbon bracelets to remind them of their pledge and signed their names to support the initiative. The first marking period is concluding on November 7th. We are looking forward to meeting with parents' guardians during the week of November 12th, which is the middle school's conference week. So if you booked a conference, make sure you show up. Our SMS book fair will open its doors the week of November 12th. It will be located in the Media Center. Multicultural Day is coming. November 20th is the date. If you would like to participate by making a presentation about your culture, please reach out to Mr. Zubia, who happens to be sitting in the back of the auditorium right now. So feel free to see him after the board meeting. For Somerville High School, the PSATs were administered to all sophomores and juniors on Wednesday, October 10th, while freshmen engaged in a morning program that included an activity fair in the high school gymnasium, small group sessions with the guidance counselors, a presentation about vaping, and breakfast compliments of the Somerville HS PTO. Students in grade 12 had a modified schedule. On October 22nd, our talented students, faculty, and alumni performed at SHS's annual Best of Broadway. Performances include songs and music from Broadway shows. It was a great night of music. And on October 24th, in support of our driver's education program, presenter Gabe Hurley spoke with our entire sophomore class to share his story and to remind students about the horrific consequences of impaired and distracted driving. Thank you to the SHS physical education teachers for organizing this event and to the Somerville HS PTO for funding it. And that concludes district highlights.
Is there any old business to be addressed? Seeing none, we'll go on to new business. It is recommended that items 1 through 4 be moved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools. They are the harassment, intimidation, and bullying report, donation to Vanderveer School for the Gaga pit, that has been in use already, and I'm told everybody enjoyed it. School bus emergency evacuation report, and middle school comfort closet. The comfort closet is being developed to provide personal hygiene items, imagine what they are, socks, things like that that children may not have in their homes. They can get them there with no charge. Can I have a motion, please?
Second.
Discussion? Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Cornell?
Yes.
Mrs. Matthews?
Yes.
Mr. Jess?
Yes.
Mr. Prudente?
Yes.
Mrs. Schweitzer?
Yes.
Mrs. Van Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Sergio?
Yes.
Mrs. Olson?
Yes. It is recommended that items 5 through 16 be moved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools. They are the harassment, intimidation, and bullying report. Some of the high school student requests. There's 2 students who have requested that we allow them to continue at Somerville through their graduate year, which I believe ends with graduation, because their families have moved out. Donation to Somerville High School, the band, marching band Booster Association has donated the amount of $5,700 to pay for some of the assistant gigs of the foot marching band for the 2018 fall season. Non-public school security aid program, and we've done this before when a private or a non-public school has security orders. We have to approve the order, so this one happens to be for Immaculate Conception School. Change order to the turf replacement project. Yes. The county commodity resale agreement. Okay. Number 9. The change order involves change to the water infiltration testing. Contract change for the ALS, use of project allowance for 100 tons of stone. Contract change for sports lab supplement field testing, round 1, soccer outlines. And number 2, round 2 rather, Somerset County commodity resale agreement, that is for the county and the school district to be able to purchase from one another. Disposal of obsolete materials, and this is from the high school. Submission of M1 comprehensive maintenance plan. The Department of Education requires that we have a maintenance plan, a 3-year plan that's submitted annually. Seal of Literacy program. This is the application of seal to the diploma itself, correct? Directly to a graduating senior's diploma that is then recognizes their proficiency in diploma. Emergency management plan. We have to have one of those, and we're approving it tonight. Field trips, and that's it. Okay. Travel? Okay, travel. Can I have a motion?
Move it.
Second.
Discussion? Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Cornell?
Yes.
Mrs. Matthews?
Yes.
Mr. Jess?
Yes.
Mr. Prudente?
Yes.
Mrs. Schweitzer?
Yes.
Mrs. Van Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Sergio?
Yes.
Mrs. Olson?
Yes.
Mrs. Fabrizi?
Yes.
Personnel, Dr. Tia?
Resolved that the Board of Education approve and/or accept the following appointments upon recommendation of the superintendent of schools. Appointments and salaries contingent upon verified documentation. To accept the resignation of Chelsea Davis for the part-time position of preschool social worker. Number 2, to approve the appointment of Leslie Hernandez to the position of book club advisor at Vanderveer School for the 18-19 school year. Number 3, to approve Sarah Durand, a teacher at Terrell Middle School in Scotch Plains School District, to observe Robert Reevy, principal of Vanderveer School 3 to 5, for 1 day in October or November, and in order to complete the requirements for educational leadership internship. Number 4, to approve the appointment of the listed individuals to the position of co-coach for the boys soccer team at Somerville Middle School for the 18-19 school year. Number 5, to approve the appointment of the listed individuals to the position of gifted and talented teacher at Vanderveer School for the 18-19 school year. Number 6, to approve Christine Birnbaum, literacy coach at Vanderveer School 3 to 5, to complete her Orton Gillingham practicum at Vanderveer School for 18-19 school year, and she will be supervised by a mentor who works with the Institute for Multisensory Education. Number 7, to approve the appointment of Jacqueline Cosman from Middle Earth to the position of mentor for Somerville Middle School for the 18-18 school year. And number 8, to approve an extension for Stephanie Phibbs to continue in the lead replacement position of kindergarten, to go from November 14th to change it to extend to November 19th.
Second. Mr. Cornell?
Yes.
Mrs. Matthews?
Yes.
Mr. Jess?
Yes.
Mr. Prudente?
Yes.
Mrs. Schweitzer?
Yes.
Mrs. Van Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Sergio?
Yes.
Mrs. Olson?
Yes.
For 9 through 12 and district-wide, resolve the Board of Education approve and/or accept the following appointments upon recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools. Appointment and salaries contingent upon verified documentation. Number 9, to approve the appointment of Alexander Bakerman to the position of DNA Club Advisor at Somerville High School for the 18-19 school year. Number 10, to approve the appointment of the attached list of individuals to the position of coach at Somerville High School for the 18-18 school year. Number 11, to approve an extension to the unpaid child care leave of absence for Sharon Gornick from September 4th to November 23rd, and change that to September 4th to January 2nd. Number 12, to approve the listed individuals to serve as mentors for the 18-19 school year at Somerville High School. Number 13, to approve the appointment of the listed individuals for their work assisting the marching band at Somerville High School for the 2018 fall season. Number 14, to approve the listed individuals to the position of volunteer at Somerville High School for the 18-19 school year. Number 15, to approve the appointment of the listed individuals to the position of substitute teacher for the 18-19 school year. Number 16, to approve the appointment of Milagros Pena Pickett to the position of substitute nurse for the 18-19 school year. Number 17, to approve Elliot Cohen, a student at Montclair State University, to complete his internship placement at Somerville High School for the 18-19 school year, and he will be supervised by Christine Thompson. Number 18, to abolish the following vacant positions from the position control roster effective November 6th. And number 19, to approve the newly created position of district-wide translator. And 20, to approve the appointment of Carmen Arroyo to the newly created position of district-wide translator for the 18-19 school year.
So moved. Second.
Nice and close. Okay, here I am. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cornell?
Yes.
Mrs. Matthews?
Yes.
Mr. Jess?
Yes.
Mr. Prudente?
Yes.
Mrs. Schweitzer? Mrs. Van Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Sergio?
Yes.
Mrs. Olson?
Yes.
Mrs. Fabrizi?
Yes.
The floor is now open for public comment on whatever topic you'd like to comment. Okay, seeing none, we will move to executive session. Resolve that the Board of Education move to recess into executive session to discuss matters involving confirmed HIV case and negotiations. We will be taking action after the executive session on the HIV